The house smelled faintly of vanilla, the way it always did when she lit the old candle on the kitchen counter. Soft rain tapped against the windows, and the world outside blurred as if it too didn't want to see what was about to happen. She stood by the table, hands trembling just slightly, though she kept them pressed firmly against her stomach, cradling the tiny life growing inside her. 3 months. She had practiced the words 100 times. We're having a baby. Simple, joyful. Across from her, he barely looked up from his phone, his fingers scrolling mindlessly. His face, once so familiar, was distant, shut down. There were tiny things she noticed now. How he didn't meet her eyes anymore, how his shoulders turned slightly away from her, how the coffee in front of him had gone cold, but he didn't seem to care. When she finally spoke, a small, hopeful, almost trembling whisper, "I have something to tell you," he sighed. Loud enough for her to hear, loud enough to say he was already tired of whatever she hadn't even said yet. "I'm pregnant," she breathed. The words floated in the air between them, fragile as glass. For a moment, nothing moved. The silence was not empty. It was full. Full of all the things she had feared but tried not to believe. Full of all the words he wasn't saying. He didn't smile. He didn't reach for her. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, let out a slow breath through his nose and muttered almost too quietly, "This wasn't supposed to happen." She blinked. Once, twice. In the silence, the world seemed to tilt. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hard, not cruel exactly, but cold in a way she couldn't touch. A stranger's eyes. "I can't do this," he said. "I won't." Her hands, still resting protectively over her stomach, felt suddenly too heavy, as if she were holding up the weight of the whole world. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She only watched him stand up, smooth his jacket, pick up his keys without meeting her gaze again. At the door, he hesitated. For half a second, she thought he might turn back. Say something. Anything. But he didn't. The door clicked softly behind him, and the house, their house, swallowed her in its emptiness. She stood there, in the small kitchen with the rain sliding down the windows like tears she refused to shed. Her heart was silent. Not broken, no. It was something quieter, something colder. A stillness so complete it felt like drowning. The candle on the counter flickered once and went out. The next morning, the world looked the same. Clouds drifted, heavy and gray, across a washed-out sky. Cars moved up and down the street. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, then fell silent. But inside the house, everything was different. She packed slowly. Not because she had much to take, no, most of her life couldn't fit into a suitcase, but because each movement felt like peeling away pieces of herself. A sweater he once draped over her shoulders on a cold night. The mug with the tiny chip on the rim where she always placed her lips. The framed photo by the bed, their wedding day, which she didn't have the strength to touch. Her hands hovered over it, fingers curling and uncurling like a breath she couldn't release. And then she turned away. The suitcase wasn't even full. A few changes of clothes, a pair of worn shoes, a small box where she kept the first picture of the baby, printed from a grainy black and white scan. She slipped it into the side pocket, close to her body, as if it could shield her from what came next. At the door, she paused. Her fingers brushed the door frame, the one he had painted blue when they first moved in, joking that it would be the doorway to their new life. She closed her eyes for a second. Not to pray. Not even to hope. Just to say goodbye. When she opened them, her vision was clear. Clearer than it had been in weeks. The suitcase wheels made a soft, scraping sound against the wood floor as she pulled it behind her. The house was so quiet it hurt. Only the faint creak of the front door swinging open broke the silence. Outside, the air was damp and cool against her skin. She stood on the front steps for a long moment, feeling the weight of the key in her pocket, the last thing tying her to this place. Slowly, carefully, she slid it out and placed it on the doorstep. No drama. No goodbye notes. No looking back. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, placed one hand instinctively over her stomach, over the small life she was carrying, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city didn't notice her. The world didn't pause. But inside her chest, something small and fragile cracked open. Not breaking, more like unfolding. A space, a possibility. She was alone now. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. But alone is not the same as defeated. As she walked, the clouds shifted above her, and for just a second, the faintest edge of sunlight broke through. She didn't smile, not yet, but her hand pressed a little firmer against her belly. "We'll keep going," she whispered. And with the sound of her suitcase wheels clicking against the pavement, she disappeared into the gray morning. The city didn't stop for her. It moved the way it always did, fast, indifferent, full of people brushing past without seeing. She walked slowly, pulling the small suitcase behind her, one hand on the handle, the other resting low on her stomach as if to steady herself. Or maybe him, the life growing there. By afternoon, her legs ached, a deep, pulsing soreness that lived in the back of her knees and the arches of her feet. She stopped at a park bench. Old wood splintered at the corners, and sat down carefully, pressing the weight of her body into the cold slats. The air was heavy with the smell of wet concrete and exhaust fumes. People passed by. A man in a crisp suit, eyes on his phone, a mother with a stroller, laughter in her wake, two teenagers sharing a set of earbuds, heads bowed close. None of them looked at her. None of them saw her. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, though it wasn't really warm, just something to cover the slow, obvious curve of her stomach. The baby kicked softly. Not a sharp jab, but a nudge, as if reminding her, "I'm here too." She smiled, but it was small, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. As the sun dropped lower, the city cooled. Shadows stretched long over the sidewalks, and the wind picked up, whispering through the trees and the cracks in the pavement. She didn't have a plan, only the clothes she wore, the few bills tucked deep in her pocket, and the tiny life inside her. She stood up again because there was no choice. She kept walking because there was no home to return to. By nightfall, the world was painted in grays and yellows, streetlights humming to life, casting tired halos on the sidewalk. She found herself near a bus station, the kind where no one asks questions. A place filled with people moving on, moving away, or just moving because standing still hurt too much. She sat on a bench there, hugging her arms around herself, shivering. Her suitcase sat at her feet like a silent, loyal dog. Around her, the city murmured, voices blurred together, tires hissing on wet streets, a baby crying somewhere in the distance, quickly hushed. She leaned her head back against the wall behind the bench and closed her eyes. "Don't cry." She told herself this over and over. "Don't cry. It's just one night. It's just one night." But the truth was heavier than the night air. She was hungry, not the sharp, sudden kind, but the slow ache that gnawed at the edges. She was tired, and for the first time, she was scared in a way that hollowed her out. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye before she could stop it. She wiped it away quickly, glancing around, but no one was looking. No one cared. The baby shifted again. She placed her hand over the movement, feeling the small, fluttering life there. The only thing she had, the only thing she hadn't lost. And in that lonely moment, with the city alive and uncaring around her, she made a promise, not out loud, just in the stillness between her ribs. "I will not break. Not for him. Not for anyone." She opened her eyes and stared into the night, the city lights blurring like distant stars, and pulled her coat tighter against the cold. The night slipped by in pieces, broken moments of half-sleep, shivering, listening. She kept one hand on her suitcase, the other resting over her stomach, as if she could shield the baby from the cold seeping through her thin coat. Morning came without color, just a pale, tired light crawling over the city. She stretched her legs, stiff and aching, and sat up straighter. A bus roared past, leaving a gust of wind and the bitter smell of diesel behind it. The ache in her stomach wasn't just from hunger anymore. It was hollow, deep, like something inside her was folding inward. She needed to move. Dragging the suitcase behind her, she wandered without thinking, without destination. The streets were waking up, shops lifting their metal shutters, the clink of cups in small cafes, the chatter of early morning customers. Smells drifted out, coffee, bread, something fried. Her mouth watered, but she swallowed hard and kept walking. It was a tiny diner, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop, that caught her eye. The windows fogged from the inside, the neon sign in the window flickering, tired but still trying, open. She hesitated at the door. Through the glass, she saw the worn booths, the chipped counter, a woman behind it wiping down a coffee machine. She looked ordinary, older, with hair tucked under a faded scarf and apron tied loose around her waist. The kind of place no one would notice her in. The kind of person who might not ask too many questions. She pushed the door open, the bell overhead giving a small tired jingle. Inside, the warmth hit her first. Not much, but enough. She made her way to a corner booth, the vinyl seat cracked and sticky. She sat carefully, one hand on her belly out of habit. The woman behind the counter glanced over, not with suspicion but something softer. Curiosity maybe, or kindness. She shuffled over, holding a coffee pot in one hand, a tired smile on her face. "What can I get you, sweetheart?" the woman asked. Her voice was rough but warm, like gravel under sunlight. She opened her mouth, but the truth stuck in her throat. "I don't have enough for a meal. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. I'm pregnant and alone and scared." Instead, she just shook her head. "Water, please." The woman studied her, her eyes sharp but not unkind. She poured the water without a word, setting it gently in front of her. "You look like you could use a hot meal." It wasn't a question. She hesitated. Pride fought with need inside her chest, a long, bitter tug of war. But pride didn't fill an empty belly. I don't have much money," she whispered, the words tasting like dust. The woman just nodded, as if she'd expected that. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned in, voice low. "Don't worry about it. I got extra pancakes I'd just throw out anyway. Sit tight." She blinked. Once, twice. Surprised by the offer, by the easy way it was given. No pity, no judgment, just a simple human kindness. Minutes later, a plate appeared in front of her. 3 pancakes, butter melting in golden puddles, a small handful of berries on the side. It looked like a feast. She wrapped her fingers around the fork, her hands trembling slightly, and took a bite. Warmth, sweetness, life. She closed her eyes for a second. Not because she was tired, though she was, but because she wanted to remember this feeling. The first kindness she had been shown in a long, long time. When she looked up again, the woman was already wiping down the counter, not asking anything, not expecting anything. For the first time in days, she felt the knot inside her chest loosen, just a little. And somewhere deep beneath her ribs, the baby kicked. Strong, sure, as if reminding her. Kindness is still real. The world is still turning. She took another bite, slower this time, and for the first time in what felt like forever, let herself breathe. The diner emptied out slowly as the day wore on. The kind woman, her name was Marla, she learned, moved quietly behind the counter, wiping down tables, refilling the sugar containers, humming under her breath like a comfort song. When the last customer left and the neon sign in the window flipped to closed, Marla locked the door, turned to her and said simply, "I got a cot in the back. It ain't much, but it's dry and warm." She hesitated, but not for long. Pride had long since lost its sharp edges. She nodded, whispered a quiet "thank you," and followed Marla through a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old wood. The back room was small, barely enough space for the cot, a folding chair, and a coat rack where Marla's apron now hung. A thin blanket was folded at the end of the bed. It wasn't home, but it wasn't the street either. She sat down slowly, feeling the cot creak under her weight. She unzipped her coat, kicked off her worn shoes, and leaned back against the wall. Marla didn't hover. She only handed her a clean glass of water and a faded towel, then left her alone with a gentle nod. The door clicked shut, and the silence settled in. It wasn't heavy like before, not like the cold silence of the street or the angry silence of her empty house. This was quieter, still. She lay back on the cot, the springs groaning slightly beneath her. The blanket was scratchy, but she didn't mind. She pulled it up to her chin, curled one hand protectively over her belly. The baby moved again, a slow roll beneath her skin, a reminder of life carrying on, even in places like this. The ceiling above her was cracked, a spiderweb of thin lines fanning out from one corner. She stared at it, tracing the lines with her eyes, breathing carefully, as if even the smallest movement might tear her open. She thought of him, the man who had left. She thought of his eyes the last time he looked at her, not angry, not regretful, just empty. A hollow door slamming shut. A part of her wanted to hate him, another part just wanted to forget. But the truth was harder. She missed the idea of what they used to be. She missed the promises whispered into her hair late at night. She missed the feeling of belonging to someone. Now she only belonged to herself, and this small life inside her. The loneliness didn't roar tonight. It sat quiet and steady in the corners of the room, in the creases of the blanket, in the soft hum of the diner's old fridge down the hall. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't sad, she was, but because the sadness was too deep, too old now for tears. She closed her eyes, let out a long, slow breath, not a sigh, a surrender. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought flickered, small but stubborn. Tomorrow, you'll try again. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something smaller, but it was enough to carry her into sleep. And in the darkness, as the city slept and the rain began to fall again, she dreamed of a place she hadn't yet seen. A place where she wasn't broken, where she wasn't less, where she was more. The first pain came in the middle of the night, a deep, dragging pull low in her belly that made her hands curl into the blanket. At first, she thought it might pass. She stayed still, breathing through it, the way she'd seen women do in hospital videos, steady and slow, as if breathing alone could carry her across the sharp edges. But it came again, stronger, deeper. A hand tightening around her spine, pulling hard. She sat up slowly, the cot groaning beneath her. Her breath caught. Another wave hit, and this time she pressed a hand against the wall to steady herself, her forehead damp with sweat. It's too soon, she thought. But the body doesn't wait for the calendar. She gathered her few things into the old bag, her hands shaking, and slipped out of the back room. The diner was dark, except for a streetlight bleeding in through the front window. Marla was asleep somewhere upstairs, and she didn't want to wake her. She pushed open the heavy door. The night hit her, cool, sharp, and she stood for a moment, teeth chattering, as she blinked up at the sky. No stars, just the heavy blanket of city light. She moved slowly down the sidewalk, dragging her suitcase behind her like a tired ghost. The hospital was 5 blocks away. Not far, but tonight, it felt like a country's worth of distance. Every few steps she had to stop, gripping the side of a building, gasping as another contraction hit. No hand to hold, no voice to guide her. Just her breath, and the baby who had decided tonight was the night. By the time she pushed through the hospital's sliding doors, her hair was plastered to her forehead, her coat soaked through from the misting rain. The woman at the front desk didn't smile. She only asked for her name, her ID, which she fumbled for with shaking fingers, and pointed down the hall. The walls were too bright, the floor too clean. Everything smelled of bleach, and something sharper underneath. Fear, maybe, or loneliness. They placed her in a room alone. A nurse helped her into a gown, her hands efficient but not unkind, and hooked her up to monitors. She lay back, staring at the pale green tiles on the ceiling, listening to the blip of the baby's heartbeat echo through the small room. Hours passed. Pain ebbed and surged, a tide she couldn't control. She squeezed the side rails of the bed until her knuckles whitened, her teeth grinding together as each contraction crashed over her. No one held her hand. No one whispered that she was doing great, that she was strong, that it would be over soon. She whispered it to herself instead. When the time came to push, the room filled with strangers and scrubs. Their voices were calm, clinical. One more. Almost there. And somewhere deep inside she found it. A strength she didn't know she had. Not for her, for him. She pushed, she cried out, the sound raw, ripped from somewhere deep. And then, a moment, a silence sharp enough to slice the air, followed by a cry. A small, angry, perfect cry. They placed him on her chest, red and wrinkled and wailing. He smelled like new skin, like life just beginning. She stared at him. His tiny fists curled tight against his face, his mouth opening and closing like a small bird. Her hand, trembling, reached up to brush a fingertip over his cheek. Soft. So soft. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Only a breath, shuddering and full of everything she didn't know how to name. You are mine, she thought. You are the best thing he ever gave me. The baby settled, his cries slowing, his tiny body fitting perfectly into the curve of her arms. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel alone. Outside the hospital window, the city lights flickered. Inside, in the quiet of that small room, she held her son close, closed her eyes, and let the rest of the world fall away. The hospital room was dim, washed in the pale blue glow of machines blinking and breathing steady. The world outside kept moving, cars humming by, lights flickering, time ticking forward, but in this little space, everything had slowed. She sat up carefully, cradling him, her son, in the crook of her arm. He was so small it made her afraid to move too quickly, afraid she might disturb the fragile miracle that lay sleeping against her. His skin was soft as a whisper, still tinged with the newness of life. His tiny chest rose and fell in a rhythm she found herself matching without thinking. Up, down, up, down. She traced her thumb along the curve of his cheek. It was a feather-light touch, but he stirred, turning his face toward her, instinctive, searching even in sleep. Her heart, bruised, cracked, battered, did something she hadn't felt in months. It warmed, it reached. She leaned in closer, breathing him in. He smelled like something brand new, that untouched by disappointment, untouched by loss, like hope wrapped in skin. The nurse had told her to rest, to let herself sleep when he slept. But she couldn't. Not yet. She didn't want to close her eyes and miss a single second of this. Not the way his fingers curled into little fists. Not the way his mouth puckered, working silently in dreams. Hours might have passed, or minutes. It was hard to tell. The world was nothing but this. Her and him, heartbeat to heartbeat, breath to breath. Then, without warning, his eyes fluttered open. Dark, wide, curious, unfocused, but searching. And then, as if recognizing her, or maybe just recognizing something safe, he smiled. It wasn't a full, toothy grin. No, not yet. It was soft, barely there. A twitch at the corners of his mouth, a scrunch of his nose, a warmth that spread across his tiny face like sunlight breaking through morning mist. But to her, it was everything. It was the first good thing to happen in what felt like forever. A tear slid down her cheek. This one not from sadness, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something older. Joy, real, raw, unexpected joy. She smiled back at him, wide and slow, as if pouring everything she had left into that one expression. And for the first time sitting there in that cold, quiet hospital room, she didn't think about the past. She didn't think about the man who left, or the house she lost, or the night spent wandering alone. She only thought about this. This boy, this life, this beginning. She pressed her lips to his forehead, breathed him in, and whispered so softly it was almost a thought. "It's you and me now." Outside, the city buzzed and roared and spun. But inside that room, in that moment, there was only stillness. Only her. Only him. And the very first smile. The days after the hospital blurred into one another. Gray mornings. Sleepless nights. Diapers, bottles, the soft, constant hum of a newborn's breathing. She moved through them like a ghost wearing her own skin, exhausted, but stubbornly alive. Marla let her stay in the back room of the diner, but she couldn't keep relying on kindness forever. She knew that. And kindness alone wouldn't pay for diapers, wouldn't buy formula, wouldn't build a life. So she worked. At first, it was small, washing dishes after closing time, wiping down the counters, sweeping the greasy floor long after the last customer had gone. Marla never said much, only handed her a rag and a tired smile, and at the end of each week, tucked a few crumpled bills into her hand. She took every dollar, folded them tight, and hid them in a cracked mug tucked behind her cot. Every night, after her son was asleep, she'd sit in the dark, counting the money slowly with shaking fingers, willing it to be enough. It never was. Not yet. So she found more work. She took odd cleaning jobs around the neighborhood, offices after hours, apartment buildings where the hallways smelled of bleach and loneliness. She wore her body thin, she wore her hands raw, she wore her pride down to the bone. But she kept moving. And when the baby slept, she studied. Marla had an old laptop, ancient with keys so worn you had to guess the letters, but it worked. Night after night, she sat at the little folding table by the back door, scrolling through free courses, teaching herself things she barely understood. Basic marketing, how to build a resume, how to make yourself seen when the world was built to ignore you. The screen's glow painted her face in cold light. Outside the thin window, the city slept. Inside, her son slept too, curled up in a second-hand crib Marla had found at a church charity sale. Sometimes, when she felt her eyelids drooping, when the words on the screen blurred and twisted, she'd glance over at him. And every time she did, she remembered why she couldn't stop. Why she wouldn't. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him. His tiny fists, his slow, steady breathing, his future still unwritten. There were nights she wanted to quit. Nights when the ache in her back was so deep she thought it would break her. Nights when the loneliness gnawed so loud she thought she would disappear inside it. But she didn't. She stayed, she studied, she worked, no applause, no medals, just the quiet, invisible work of rebuilding a life from nothing. And slowly, slowly, something shifted. Not the world. The world didn't change. But she did. She grew calluses on her hands. She grew thicker skin. She grew a spine out of all the nights she chose not to give up. And every morning, she woke up to the sound of her baby's soft cooing, his little hands reaching for her. And she knew, this is how you survive. 1 hour, 1 breath, 1 stubborn heartbeat at a time. It happened on an afternoon that looked like every other. Sky hung low, sun hidden behind a thick blanket of cloud, the diner half full with the usual crowd of truckers and tired faces. She moved between tables, wiping down surfaces, balancing plates, refilling coffee cups with practiced hands. Her son was asleep in the back room, tucked under a second-hand quilt, his tiny chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. Marla had let her bring him here once he was old enough to sleep through the noise. No daycares would take him with no address, no steady job, no real papers. So he stayed close, always close. She was clearing a booth when a woman sat down by the window, alone. A laptop open in front of her, papers spread across the table like small islands of chaos. The woman was sharp, not sharp in a cruel way, but in a way that said she saw things others didn't. Her hair was pulled back tight, her jacket draped neatly over the seat, a pen twirling absently between her fingers as she frowned down at a spreadsheet. She looked tired. Not just the way anyone looks after a long day, but tired in her bones, the way only people who have carried heavy things for too long get. When she ordered, her voice was brisk but not unkind. Just coffee. Black. She brought it over quietly, careful not to spill, careful not to interrupt whatever world the woman was busy wrestling. But as she set the cup down, the woman's eyes flicked up, sharp, seeing, and for a second they just looked at each other. Not the way customers usually looked at her, through her, around her, but at her. Her uniform was plain, her shoes worn, her hair tied back in a quick knot. Nothing special, nothing polished. But the woman's gaze didn't soften in pity. It sharpened, in interest. "You're new," the woman said simply. She nodded. "Been here a few months." The woman's eyes narrowed, thoughtful, measuring. "You good with numbers?" she asked. She blinked, caught off guard. "I guess I've been studying." It felt silly to admit. Late nights hunched over a flickering screen, reading free PDFs, practicing Excel formulas on a borrowed laptop. The woman smiled, not wide, not warm, but real. "I run a small firm," she said, sliding a card across the table. "Marketing and analytics. We're looking for interns. Doesn't pay much at first, but it's work." She stared at the card. Simple white stock, neat black print. An address, a name. She felt her hands tremble slightly as she picked it up, as if holding something fragile, something dangerous possibility. "Thank you," she said, voice low, steady. She tucked the card into her pocket like a secret. The woman just nodded once, sipped her coffee, and returned to her laptop, the moment already over for her. But not for her. No, for her. It was everything. Later that night, after the diner had closed and the baby was asleep, she sat at the little folding table in the back room, turning the card over and over between her fingers. A door had opened, a crack of light in a long tunnel. And though fear clawed at her, what if you're not good enough? What if you fail? Something stronger held her still. What if you don't? She looked over at her son, small and perfect in his crib, and smiled. What if this is the start? She set the card down beside the laptop, opened a new browser tab, and began to draft an email. Slow, careful, each word like a step forward. Outside, the night pressed close. Inside, something new stirred. Not hope exactly, but the beginning of it, the first small step, the first big leap. The office was smaller than she expected. Not glass towers and marble floors, but a cramped suite above a laundromat. Peeling paint, scuffed floors, desks pressed close together, cluttered with papers and coffee-stained mugs. But it didn't matter, because when she pushed open the door, when she stepped inside, clutching her second-hand bag and the resume she had spent hours agonizing over, it felt like a world away from the diner, from the cot, from the corners she used to sleep in. The woman from the diner, Claire, greeted her with a nod. Not warm, not cold, just direct. No long interviews, no trick questions. "Show up, work hard, learn fast," Claire said simply, sliding a thin packet across the desk. "You in?" She nodded. She was in. The first days were brutal. She wasn't ready for the pace, the quick shuffle of tasks, the emails that never stopped, the reports that needed fixing 5 minutes ago. She wasn't ready for the language, the casual shorthand thrown around, the quiet expectation that you knew how to swim even if no one taught you how. Most of the others were younger, smoother, fresh out of college with bright clothes and fast fingers on keyboards. She was slower, rougher at the edges. Her clothes were plain, her shoes scuffed. They noticed. Of course they noticed. Whispers behind hands. Sideways glances when she stumbled over a software program or asked too many questions. She stayed quiet. She kept her head down. She wrote everything down, every instruction, every mistake, every correction, in a battered notebook she kept tucked under her desk. At night, she went home to the back room behind the diner, exhausted, muscles aching, eyelids heavy, and fed her son his bottle, rocked him to sleep, kissed his soft hair. Then she opened her old laptop, and she studied. Every term she didn't understand, every tool she hadn't mastered during the day, she learned at night when the world was sleeping. No one cheered her on. No one saw the late hours, the quiet sacrifices. But every morning, she showed up again. Worn shoes, plain clothes, a notebook filled with more knowledge than the day before. There were days she almost broke, when the weight of it all pressed too heavy against her ribs. When a mistake at work made her feel like the walls were closing in. When she sat in the bathroom, breathing slow and hard, fighting the sting of tears. But she didn't break. She bent. She bent until she learned how to stand taller. Slowly, so slowly she hardly noticed it herself, things began to shift. A small smile from Claire when she nailed a client brief. A quiet nod of approval when she caught an error others missed. A sense of trust, building brick by brick, moment by moment. She didn't become the best overnight. She didn't dazzle anyone, but she became something harder, something rarer, reliable. And in this new world, loud, fast, ruthless, reliability was gold. One evening, as she gathered her things to leave, Claire stopped by her desk. "You're doing good," Claire said simply. No fanfare, no confetti. Just 4 words. But for her, for the girl who used to sleep on benches, who gave birth alone, who worked under flickering streetlights, they were more than enough. She tucked her notebook into her bag, zipped it carefully closed, and smiled, small but real. Outside, the night waited. Dark. Endless. But inside her a steady flame burned, the kind you feed with hard work, with stubborn hope, with the quiet belief that this is not where it ends, not even close. It started like most mornings. Coffee cooling on her desk, inbox bloated with emails she hadn't yet answered, the soft buzz of phones and printers filling the cramped office air. She sat at her desk, head bent, fingers hovering over her keyboard, piecing together a report that no one would really notice unless she got it wrong. That's what most of it felt like, invisible work. Work that disappeared into someone else's name, someone else's presentation. But today was different. Claire walked out of her glass cubicle holding a file, thick, heavy, and scanned the room. The office stilled just slightly, the way it does when something shifts beneath the surface. Claire's eyes landed on her. "Can you come here a minute?" She stood up quickly, heart thudding against her ribs, palms already damp. It was never good to be called out of the blue. Not here. Not in a place where mistakes were measured in lost clients. She stepped into Claire's office, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft click. The air smelled of coffee and printer ink and something sharper. Nerves maybe, or expectation. Claire sat down, flipping open the file. "This," she said, tapping a page, "is from the Sutton project." The client everyone was quietly afraid of, big, demanding, ruthless. Claire pushed the file across the desk. She leaned over, scanning the page, and her heart stuttered. It was hers. The research she stayed up late perfecting, the pitch points she agonized over, the strategy she double-checked until her eyes blurred. Claire leaned back, arms folded. "They chose your proposal," she said. Simple, flat, but underneath a thread of something rare. Respect. She blinked. Once, twice. Tried to find words and failed. Claire smiled just a little. They liked the honesty. Said it wasn't flashy, but it was real. Said it understood their brand better than they did. She sat very still, trying to catch up with the moment. The buzzing in her ears made it hard to hear anything else. The words "your proposal" echoed in her chest, heavy and warm and unbelievable. Claire stood, holding out a hand. "Good work," she said. The kind of words that are easy to say, but hard to earn. She reached out, shook Claire's hand, firm, steady, though her fingers trembled slightly in the grip. When she stepped back into the main office, the world hadn't changed. The phone still rang, the printers still hummed, but she had changed. In her pocket, tucked between her fingers, was the corner of the printed proposal. Her name, her words, her work. She sat back down, feeling her son's photo, tucked into the bottom of her bag, pressing gently against her side. A reminder of why she kept going. For a moment, she just sat there, the noise of the office swirling around her, the weight of the small victory heavy in her chest. It wasn't much. Not to the world, not yet, but to her. The girl who once counted coins for a cup of coffee, who once rocked a baby to sleep in a borrowed crib. It was everything. She smiled, slow and quiet. And without ceremony, without anyone really noticing, she turned back to her keyboard and kept going. Because now she knew, success doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it slips in through the cracks, quiet and sure. Sometimes it feels just like this. The change wasn't sudden. It didn't crash into her life like a wave. It crept in, quiet, careful, like sunlight slipping through blinds before morning fully breaks. Months passed, then a year. She still woke before the city, her world ticking between the quiet breaths of her son sleeping beside her and the sound of distant traffic rolling awake. But now, there was more. The diner's back room had long since emptied. She had moved into a small apartment. Nothing grand, nothing shiny, but hers. 2 small rooms, creaky floors, a window that stuck in the winter. But the rent was paid on time. The fridge was never empty, and the crib in the corner had been replaced by a real bed, painted bright blue with sheets printed with stars. She had a second-hand, worn smooth where someone else's elbows had once rested, where she worked late into the night on projects that mattered, for clients that now knew her name. Claire trusted her with bigger things, not because she was loud, not because she demanded it, but because she earned it in the way that mattered most. Quietly, consistently. Every day, without fanfare. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't the one in expensive suits or towering heels, but her work spoke for her long before she ever opened her mouth. She saved money, a little at a time, tucking it into a separate account she never touched. Some nights, when she couldn't sleep, she'd open the app and just stare at the slow, steady growth. Not much, but enough. Enough to mean she could breathe without flinching. Enough to mean her son would never feel the sharp edge of fear she had lived with for too long. And her son, he grew too. No longer a fragile infant in her arms, but a boy with wide eyes and a laugh that cracked open the hardest parts of her. He didn't know the weight she carried. He didn't know about the benches, the cold nights, the empty pockets. To him, the world was safe, solid, and that, more than anything, was her greatest success. On Sundays, they sat in the tiny kitchen, she with her coffee, him with a sippy cup, sunlight pooling across the faded linoleum. She would watch him stack blocks, knock them over, build again, and she would smile, because it wasn't the big moments, the promotions, the raises, that filled her. It was this, the slow, steady building of a life. Brick by invisible brick. One evening, as she folded laundry, her son toddled over, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. A drawing, wild and colorful, full of lines that made no sense but were perfect just the same. He held it up proudly. "Us," he said, pointing to 2 stick figures standing under a lopsided sun. She laughed, not the tight laugh she used to give the world, but something real, something soft. She bent down, kissed the top of his head, and pinned the picture to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a star. The picture wobbled, the paper too thin, the magnet too heavy, but it stayed. Just like them. And standing there in the soft hum of their small kitchen, she realized this wasn't survival anymore. This was living, quiet, steady, enough. The envelope was thick, heavy in her hand, the kind made of paper that costs more than some people's groceries. Her name was printed in gold script across the front. No return address. She stared at it for a long time before opening it, the edges cutting soft against her fingers. Inside, an invitation, a gala, black tie, hosted at one of the city's most expensive hotels. She almost laughed, a small dry sound that barely escaped her throat. It wasn't the invitation that made her heart shift in her chest. It was the list of sponsors at the bottom, a name she hadn't seen in years, tucked there in fine print like an afterthought. His name, She hadn't thought about him much lately. Not in the raw, bleeding way she used to. The past had softened, faded, like an old bruise you forget until you catch it in the right light. But seeing it now, his name, tied to a world she had quietly rebuilt herself into, felt like standing at the edge of an old, familiar cliff. She placed the invitation on the table and stared at it. She didn't have to go. No one expected her. No one would miss her if she stayed home, tucked safely in the life she'd fought to build. But something deep inside her, something still tender, still stubborn, whispered, "Go." Not for revenge, not for pride, for the girl who had once stood on a street corner with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to herself. I will not break. The night of the gala, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple black dress she had saved 3 months to buy. It wasn't flashy, no glitter, no bright colors, just clean lines, soft fabric, and the way it fit her body. Strong now, not frail, like armor she didn't have to explain. Her hair was pinned back. Her makeup was light, enough to remind the world she was here, fully, quietly, without apology. She kissed her son goodnight, whispering promises of breakfast pancakes and morning cartoons, and stepped out into the night. The hotel rose against the sky like a monument to everything she once thought she wanted, sharp, gleaming, unreachable. But tonight she walked through its doors without hesitation. Not a guest, not an outsider, a woman who belonged to herself. The ballroom shimmered, chandeliers, music soft and expensive, the low murmur of conversations blending into a comfortable hum. She moved through the room with quiet confidence, not searching for him, but not avoiding it either. And then, across the marble floor, near the edge of the crowd, she saw him. Older, thinner than she remembered, the edges of his suit too crisp, too careful. The woman on his arm, not the one he had left her for, but another, newer version, laughing too brightly, gripping his hand too tightly. He didn't see her at first. Why would he? He wasn't looking for the girl he had once abandoned, but she stood tall, not hiding, not shrinking, and when he finally glanced her way, his face faltered. A flicker, a crack. Recognition sinking slow and heavy behind his eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She simply held his gaze, calm, steady, as if to say without words, I survived you. I became someone you could never have broken. Thank you. She nodded once, small, polite, and turned away. No confrontation, no scene, no revenge needed. The silence between them said more than any words could. As she walked toward the far side of the room, toward the real conversations, the real possibilities waiting for her now, she felt the weight of it lift, the last trace of the life she once thought she couldn't live without. She didn't look back. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Inside, her heart was light. Not empty, not hollow, full. Finally, fully full. She didn't leave the gala in a rush. There was no drama, no sudden escape, just a quiet slip through the heavy doors, her heels clicking softly against the marble, the night air folding cool and easy around her. Outside, the city glowed. Tall towers, bright lights, cars humming along distant streets. A world still turning. A life still moving forward. She stood on the steps for a moment, breathing it all in, the weight of the evening, the weight of everything that had come before. Inside, he was still there somewhere, probably sipping champagne he didn't even like, surrounded by people who didn't know who he really was, or worse, didn't care. But she had already left the most important thing behind. No shouting, no confrontation, no need for revenge spoken loud. The real victory was quieter. It was in the way she stood taller now, steadier, in the way her life didn't bend toward him anymore, didn't ache for his approval, his apology, his attention. He had taken so much once, her trust, her safety, the future she thought they were building together. But what he left behind, that space, that hollow ache, she had filled it herself. With work, with sacrifice, with a stubborn, unbreakable kind of love. For her son, for herself. And that was the revenge. Not rage, not bitterness, but becoming someone he could no longer touch, no longer even reach. She stepped down onto the sidewalk, her dress brushing softly around her knees, the cool night folding around her like a second skin. A car passed, headlights cutting through the dark, and for a moment she caught her reflection in the glass doors behind her. Not the girl he left. A woman now, born in some places, stronger in others. A woman who knew exactly who she was. She smiled, not wide, not for show, but the kind of smile that fills the soul from the inside out. Small, certain. She walked slowly down the street, no hurry in her steps. Every stride quiet, deliberate, every stride saying, I survived, I rebuilt, I won, and you never even saw it coming. Morning came quietly. Not a loud, blazing sunrise, just a slow, gentle leaking of light over the horizon, softening the sharp edges of the night. She sat on the worn steps outside their apartment, a mug of coffee cooling between her palms. The air was still, heavy with that early kind of silence only morning knows when the world hasn't yet remembered to rush. Behind her, inside the apartment, her son slept curled up under his blue-starred blanket. One hand tucked under his chin, his breath slow and even, safe, untroubled. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the quiet sink into her skin. No noise, no demands, no ache, just this. Breath, stillness, enough. Across the street, the first shops were waking up, metal shutters rattling, someone sweeping the sidewalk with wide, lazy strokes. She sipped the coffee, bitter and lukewarm, but didn't mind. There had been a time she would have given anything for a morning like this. A roof, a bed, a son who knew only love, not fear. The sky lightened slowly, the gray lifting, bruised purple bleeding into pale gold. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one standing in the rain with a suitcase and nowhere to go, the one sitting on a cold bench, whispering promises to the baby she carried. The one who cried in hospital hallways, in diner back rooms, in silence because no one could hear and it wouldn't have mattered if they did. That girl didn't disappear. She lived quietly inside her, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what it cost, of what it took, of what it meant to start again when nothing was left. Her son stirred inside, a small thump, the sound of a sleepy foot kicking against the wall, and she smiled into the morning. The day would begin soon. Breakfast, lunch packed for daycare, meetings, deadlines, life. But for now, for this moment, she allowed herself to simply sit and breathe. The world stretched out before her, not perfect, not easy, but hers. Owned, earned. The sun finally broke over the tops of the buildings, casting long, thin shadows across the street. She lifted her face to it, let it warm the places inside her that had been cold for too long. And in that quiet, endless moment she thought, I didn't just survive. I lived.